Lesson number 12. Hi traders. Let us go over how to draw stuff on your chart. This is the funniest thing about bind scripts. Being able to visualize what you are analyzing. To do that, we have several functions to work with. The most common function we will be using is a plot. Plot draws a line onto our chart. So, for example, the most basic thing we can plot is the number 1. Let us save my code here. And here you can see we are plotting the number 1 on every bar on my chart as just a solid line. And here you can see we are plotting the number 1 on every bar on my chart as just a solid line. If I change this to close, then we will be plotting the closing price value of every bar on my chart. We essentially get a line graph there or a line chart. So let us leave this as close for now, and let us go over all of the parameters we have to work with here. So the first one is a title. Now for each parameter you can explicitly say what the parameter is like. This is the title. Save my code, and now this does not actually draw anything onto my chart. But if we open up the data window over here, go to the data window, you can see here this is my script, and we have the title of the plot there and a value next to it. So this is mostly for debugging, but it is a good idea to title your plots anyway, even if you don't use this, just so that you know what this is. So I could say closing price, and at least now just glancing at my script, if this was not a closing price and it was some sort of equation, having a title here will help me and anyone who reads my code to know exactly what this is drawing. Now, because title is the second parameter in the plot, if I hover over this, you can see it says series and then title. A series is just a series of data. So in this case, we are plotting the series of closing values because the next required parameter or expected parameter is a title. I don't need to explicitly say the title here. I can just have the title straight in just like that, and that will work just the same. So that is fine. Let us move on to another parameter. Let us say I wanted to specify the drawing style of my plot now, and I did not want to specify the line width because I am skipping a parameter here, and we are not providing parameters in order to as they appear. I would need to explicitly say what my parameter is here because this function is expecting a line width. Next, I need to tell it I am not giving you a line width. I am giving you a style now. So I did not have to specify series here, and I did not have to specify a title here, although that would work just the same. And then we are plotting an area onto my chart using the closing price value. If I get rid of these and get rid of this line 1, we will get a compiler error because PineScript was expecting a color there. If I hover over this, you can see it says series title color line width style. I skipped 2 parameters here and I was expecting a color. But if I explicitly tell PineScript this value, here is a style parameter, then I don't need to provide these other parameters, and just the default value will be used for any parameter that is not specified. The default value will be used. So let us go over each parameter. The next one is color. So that is self-explanatory. If you type in color control space, you have a bunch of inbuilt colors to work with. Let us pick up a fun color. Let us go with lime. Say my code. You can see here a little color panel or widget appears to show me what that color will look like on my chart. So if you hover over that, don't click it, just hover and then pull this to where you want it. And you can drag this around here. Pick a color and then click on here to convert the color to whatever you clicked on. So this parameter accepts a hex code for those HTML and CSS programmers out here. This is the way web browsers interpret colors. So we can literally just click on and color we want here. Let us stick with that color. Click on that. Now I can either have this as a hex code or a red, green, blue value. This is my preferred way of working with colors because it is more intuitive for me to visualize red. Having a value of 0 means no red, no green or no blue. Having a value of 255 means full red, full green or full blue. So if I change the B value here to 0, that would give me fluoro green. So if I change that to a 0 and save my script, we get a bright green line there. So color RGB gives us three values to work with: red, green, blue. And there are an optional parameter here for transparency. So if I set this to 50, that would be 50% transparent and my line will be a bit faded there because it is actually transparent and anything that was drawing underneath it would be visible through this plot. But let us change this back to color.line for now and move on to the next parameter, which is line width. This is pretty self-explanatory. The default value is 1. It is not applicable to every style. So every plot style is the next parameter. But for now, since the default value is 1, let us try to see how this changes the plot. You can see it is a little bit thicker, and the higher the line thickness or line width, the thicker our plot will be. As you can see there, the default value is 1. Moving on, we have style. So if I type here style and then scroll down to plot, these are the different styles of plots we have to work with. I won't go over all of these because there is quite a few. By default, we are working with the plot style line. If I change it to histogram, we will get like columns like you can see there. Kind of like a MACD kind of style. If I change it to an area, we will get an area and so on. You get the idea. There is some pretty cool styles we have to work with here. And obviously, depending on what scripts you are working on, you might prefer one of these styles over another. So, step line. If I save my code and I zoom in, we get steps between each line instead of having the smoothing of a regular line. I will change this back to an area for now. Let us have a look at the next parameter, which is track price. By default, this is turned off. If I change this to true and save my code, we will now get a horizontal line that is tracking the current value of price on my chart. So as price moves, so will this line. And if I come over to my price scale here and right click and come down to labels, I can turn on or off indicators in financial value levels. And now I can actually see what indicator value on my chart. Now this does not need to be a price value. I already have the price value showing up there. So let us change my plot from close to volume. Save my code. Now we are drawing volumes as an area and I can actually see the volume dotting on my scale here. So remember, if you forget what each parameter is, you can specify it explicitly by typing the parameter name there. But I will leave that off for now. And let us move on to the next one, which is hist base. This is the price value used as the reference level when rendering a plot on a histogram. So let us change this back to histogram. Style histogram. We will leave track price on and we will change this value to, let us say, for some reason we wanted the midpoint of our histogram to be 500. So I will change that to 500 and save my code. You can now see that anything above 500 is positive bar and anything below is a negative bar or a downward bar and the midpoint is about 500. Now this is a useless example, but there is obviously times when you would want this. This is how the MACD works with its positive and negative histograms. The midpoint is 0 and anything above or below 0 gets drawn like this. So that is his base offset. If I change this back to close and we change this back to line, offset is how many bars to draw back to the left. So actually I will leave this as histogram and I will change offset to, let us change it to 50 so that it is really obvious what this is doing. If I rescale my chart and we zoom in here, you can see that the latest bar here is drawing 50 bars to the right. So we have offset from the current bar 50s to the right. And if this was drawing over price action, if I change this to overlay equals true, save my code and read this back to my chart. Now we are drawing a delayed histogram of price. So you can see this peak here is offset 50 bars to the right using the offset function. If I wanted to shift it back to the left, we would use a negative number. So minus 50 will now shift our drawings 50 bars to the left. There are certain times when you would use this function. For example, the Ichimoku cloud uses this feature, but most plots won't. So we will leave this as 0 for now and we will move on. Join. If this is set to true, join equals true, then all plot points will be joined with a line. And this is applicable only to style cross and style circle. So let us change this back to, let us change it to style cross as the closing price. This will plot the closing price and actually let me move this back into its own panel. There we go. If I zoom in here, it is a bit hard to see, but we actually have, because of my screen resolution, it is really hard to see, but we have crosses drawing here and a line connecting them all. If I change this back to false, which it is default, then we are only going to have crosses. If you can see, we got these dot crosses. So if you wanted to join these plots, you would set join to true. So I will leave it as false for now, and we will move on to the next parameter, which is editable. So editable is on by default. So if I said editable equals true, save my code. What this does is allow the user to come up to the settings here, come to style and edit the color and the plot style of that plot. But if for some reason you don't want the user to do that, and generally you would, I don't really know why you turn this to false. But there may be reason to avoid confusion with a particular plot. You may want to set this to false. And now when I save my code and it updates, people cannot change the style of that plot anymore. You can see the settings have disappeared completely for that plot. So that is how you turn off editability. So last dictates the number of bars from the current bar back into the past to plot onto our chart. So if I change this to 10 bars and I change this back to line, we save my code. We will now only be drawing the last 10 bars of price action because show last is set to 10. If I count back 10 bars, remember the current bar is bar 0. So 0 to 9 is 10 bars. Normally you won't want to specify this, but I will set this to 100 for now. So it will draw over the past 100 bars. We will move on to the next parameter, which is display. This is a very important parameter. This allows us to tell PineScript how we want to display our plot. So by default, it is going to be set to display.all. So if I save my code, this will drop here. It will draw on my chart. It will draw into the data window here. But we can see it everywhere. Now let us say, for example, I wanted to plot some information that my script is doing, but I don't want to see it. I don't want the user to see it. I just want to be able to see it as a developer. This is for debugging. I am just curious to see what a certain value is. It is not relevant to the person using the script. It is purely for me as a coder. I could change this to display data window, save my code, and now this plot will disappear off my chart. It no longer displays here. It no longer displays here. It only displays in the data window. So now when I hover my mouse over a bar, I can see what the value for that bar is, and it will only display here. So this is a great for reducing clutter on your script. Usual clutter when you still need to plot something. Sometimes you won't want to plot a value onto your actual screen like this, but you still want to see it on the indicator value without having to open the data window. So a good example of this might be the ATR. Maybe you want to see the average true range, but you don't care to see it plotted onto the chart. It is not important. It is just for you to able to visually see what the current ATR is on the current bar. Maybe for stop loss placement or something like that. If I change this to TAATR 14 period ATR and I change this to status line, save my code. Now we will be plotting the current ATR value on my status line, but it is not drawing on my scale here. So maybe I have other things drawing here, and now I know this is the ATR. It says closing price there because of my title. If I change this to ATR, now we can see that that is the current ATR value. Some other options we have here is pain. So this is the opposite. Let us say I only want to see the ATR on my chart, but I don't want to see it here and I don't want to see it in the data window. I can change this to a pane and this will draw onto the window pane. So now if I save my code, now we have the ATR drawing, but we don't have a label. It is not in our data window and it is not in our status bar. It is only drawing onto the chart. So it is not often that you need this, but the option is there if you do. We also have price scale. So let us say we want to plot the closing price. I will just change this to my plot, save my code. Now the value will now draw. I need to shrink this down a bit. In fact, let us reset the chart view. Now I am drawing the closing price of the current market without anything in my status bar, anything on my chart or anything in my data window. So this is reducing clutter. Again, it is not often you would use that feature, but it is there if you need it. So those are the main options, and you also have displayed on none. So for example, I have a script where I have a version number and I use this for users of my script to know what version of my script they are using. So I can say plot in a version 3.19. If I say display equals display dot none and save my code, now it does not draw here. It does not draw in the data window. It does not draw anywhere. But if I come up the settings and open this, you can see that the plot is in my style settings, and so I can see the version number without it cluttering up anywhere on my chart. So that is one use case for display dot none. For now, let us leave this as a display dot all and move on to the next parameter, which is format. Format determines whether the script formats this plot's value as prices, percentages, or volume values. So I will show you exactly what this does. If we change this to volume and I change format equals format dot price, save my code. Now we are plotting the volume as a price value. So this is showing the Bitcoin volume in terms of Bitcoin as we would format price. So two decimal places after the quote price, that is the number we get here. So on this bar here we had 1327.02 Bitcoin traded. If I change this to volume, you will see that we now have on that same bar 1.02k. Now the Bitcoin, it is not a big deal, but if we go to something like SPY, change this to SPY, you can see that now says 36 million contracts traded. If I change this back to price, you are going to see why this format option exists. You can see now it is showing the exact number of contracts traded, which is obviously a very large number, and we don't really need to know that when we are dealing with a volume reading. An abbreviated version of that is just fine when we are dealing with volume, especially for large liquid instruments like this. So if I change that back to volume, you can now see these values change to 34 million and it is rounded to the nearest value. Percentage is self-explanatory. Percent will display this as a percentage. So you can see there. So it is up to you to make sure you are plotting the correct value corresponding to the format here. So if this value here was a latest change is to TA, ROC on the close over the past 10 bars. Now you can see this is plotted as a percentage, and that is exactly what we want. If I did not do that, if I got rid of this, then that would be plotting as a regular decimal value. You can see the percentage sign has disappeared off there. So that is what the format parameter is for. We have a couple left. We have precision. This is decimal precision. So if I change this to 5 and leave this as ROC rate of change and save my code, we will now get that percentage value with 5 decimal places. So depending on what you are working with, you may need more decimal places to get the accurate reading. That is what the precision parameter is for. The final parameter as of November 2024. Sometimes you add new parameters. But for now, this is all the parameters we have to work with, and that is force overlay. So this is a really good parameter as well. They save the base for last. Let us say we wanted to draw the RSI value. So we will change this to RSI and get rid of all these parameters here. Save my code. So now we are getting the current RSI value. Let us say that every time price exceeds 70, I want to draw an arrow on my price action. So I want the RSI value drawing down here, and I want something to draw on my chart as well. What I could do here is say plot shape TAR RSI close 14 over 70 question mark 1 otherwise NA. You don't need to know what this code is doing. We will cover this later on in the course, this sort of advanced code. These blue X drawing whenever the RSI value goes over 70, but I want this drawing over my price bars. So what I can do is set force overlay equals true. Save my code, and now those crosses have jumped out of there up to onto my price action, and for every bar that is printed over 70 RSI, we are getting these crosses. That is what the force overlay true parameters does. Obviously, it is false by default. Now we cannot do the other way around. If I were to set overlay here to true and remove this from my chart, save it and add it back on. Now we are getting the RSI value drawing over price action and the plot shapes drawing over price action. And this is now redundant because I have added this script, this setting here to true. Overlay equals true. Everything my script does now draws over price action. So this is a one-way street when I am working with an oscillator like the RSI or MACD or any other oscillator. I would want this to be false, which it is by default. So I can get rid of that. Remove this from my chart, save it, add it to my chart, and then for anything I want drawing over price action, I need to set force overlay equals true. So that is it for the plot function. A lot to cover there. Lesson number 13. Hi traders. Welcome to the fill function lesson. In this lesson, I am going to show you how you can use the fill function to fill between two values on your chart with a certain color. So it is really quite easy. For this particular demonstration, I am going to just plot the high and I am going to assign this plot to a variable. So you can actually assign plots to variables and then reference those variables in other functions like the fill function. So we are going to assign H to plot the high and L to plot the low, and then we are going to use the fill function to fill a color between these two values. So before we do that, let us save the script and see the two plots on our chart. There they are. I will zoom in a bit here. Now let us fill between these two plots. So the fill function takes a whole bunch of parameters. There are two different versions of the fill function. One takes plots as its reference point to fill between. The other one takes horizontal lines. But the two functions behave very similarly. We will go over the plots first. So to fill between two plots, we just need to pass in our two plot variables, so H and L, and then we need to specify a color. So I am going to set this to color dot red, and that is it. If I save the script, we will now be filling these two plots with the color red like you see there. And as I showed in the previous lesson, if you want to use transparency, you can use the color new color and then specify your transparency. So if we wanted this to, let us say, 25% transparent, we would put in 25, close off that parenthesis, and then close off the fill function parenthesis, and then save the script. And it is hard to see there, but the transparency did drop. If we set this to 90, then we will be 90% transparent and we will barely be able to see the red color. There we go. Let us set this back to 25 and let us move on to some of these other parameters. So the next one is title. This parameter applies to all of the drawing functions in PineScript. We could call this whatever we want. We will call this one fill it a fish. Why not? Click save. And when we open up the settings menu, there is our filler a fish. And you can obviously adjust this however you want to. The user of your script can change the color transparency to turn it off if they want to. The next parameter is editable, which is the same on all of these drawings functions. This just turns on or off the editability of your plot. So if by default it is obviously set to true because we can edit it here. But if we set this to false, save the script, then now when we open this up, there is no filler to fish. Very disappointing. I don't know why you would want to deny the users of your script the ability to edit your filler to fish. But if you are a party popper like that, you can do that in your script using the editable parameter. So the next parameter that we can work with our fill function is fill gaps. So before we use this, let us create a gap in our plots. To do that, I am going to hardcode a little conditional statement in here. This is a little bit advanced. We will cover this stuff in a future chapter of the course. So don't feel overwhelmed when you see this code. If you are new to programming, this might scare you a little bit. But don't worry, I will explain exactly how this works in a future lesson. This is just to demonstrate what gaps look like when you are plotting onto your chart. So for this, I am going to say, is the higher greater than 116? If so, plot the high. Otherwise, plot nothing. Now again, don't worry if this looks confusing to you. It is not important for this lesson. All we want to do here is generate some gaps in our plots. So let me save this script, and now you can see that our lines have become some sort of abstract art project, and I need to change this to the low. And now if I save the script, there we go. Now it might be easier for you to see what is going on here. If I change the style of our plot like I showed in the previous lesson on the plot function, we covered a few of these styles. One of the style we did not cover is style line break. So if I copy that down here and save the script, you can now see that there is gas. There is breaks between some of our plots. That is because of the style we have selected here. And notice that our fill function does not fill between these gas. Well, we can change that with the fill gas parameter. If I set this to true and save the script, this gas will now be filled by the fill function. Now the final parameter I haven't covered yet is the show last parameter. Now this does the same thing as it does in the plots lesson. If I say show underscore last to 10 for example, and we get rid of all of this and reset my chart, the fill function is now only filling the last 10 bars on our chart. So that is it for the plot version of the fill function when we use the fill function to fill between two plot variables. Those are all the parameters we have to work with. Now I will show you how to use the horizontal line version of this fill function. To under syntax. So under syntax down here you will see that we have two fill functions. One with h lines, one with plots. To use h lines it is quite easy. All we do is use the hline function and then we pass in a value. So for this example, I am going to pass in 1.16, and for the bottom h line I am going to pass in 1.155, and for this let us set the color to color.green. And now let us save the script, and now we have an error here. I forgot that we need to include at least one output function called like a plot, bar color, etc. We need to draw something onto the chart, actual chart. So to do that, I am just going to plot NA, which will just draw nothing onto our chart. If I save the script, there we go. Now it works fine. If I shrink this box down a little bit, you can see our two horizontal lines here at 116 and 155, and we are filling between those two horizontal lines. Now I won't go over all of the parameters for this fill function because they are identical to the previous one. The only difference with this one is that we do not have access to the show last parameter. So we cannot use the show last parameter to limit how many bars this fill function. This fill function draws over when working with horizontal lines. Anyway, there we have it. That is the fill function. Those are the parameters we have to work with, and that is the end of this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Lesson number 14. Hello friends, welcome back to another lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be exploring colors in PineScript. So we have several ways to work with colors in our scripts. The most common colors you will probably use are the inbuilt colors. So right here I have pretty much a blank script. All I have done is change the plot function to a background color function. I have created a variable called my total awesome color and I have set this variable to color.black, and then I am just passing this variable into our background color function. As such, we are getting a black background plotting into our indicator box here. So the first color I want to cover are the inbuilt ones. If we press Ctrl space after writing color and a full stop, we get all of the color namespace functions and variables. They are all mixed in here. We will go over the RGB functions and all of these other functions here in a moment. But what I want to draw your attention to are those colors here. These are all built-in colors that you can quickly and easily reference in your scripts. So if we wanted to set this to aqua, if I save the script viola, we have an aqua background color. So that is the easiest way to use the color in Pine script. We do have a few other options here though. The next option I want to show you is the RGB function. So this function takes up to 4 parameters. It requires a minimum of 3. You need to specify the red amount, the green amount and the blue amount. If you remember primary school, in primary color tables, a mix of these colors will give you different colors, and these values range from 0 to 255. Now don't ask me why it is not 0 to 100. It is complex to explain. It has something to do with how many bits, like computer bits, are involved in the number that generates the color. You don't need to know any of that stuff. All you need to know is that 100% red is 255, 0% red is 0. So if I wanted to get just the color red, I would type in here 255, comma 0, comma 0. Then when I save the script, we will get a bright red background onto our indicator box. So the first number is our red value, the second is our green value RG, and then B is blue. That is our final value here. We can also optionally, this is not mandatory, but you can choose to specify a transparency amount. So if I put 50 in here, when I save the script, our color will have a 50% transparency applied to it, and it will be little bit dimmer as you see there. So that is all you really need to know about the RGB function. If you want to get a mix of red, green and blue to generate a custom color, you can use various free tools online. Just Google RGB generator or RGB colors, and there is plenty of tools out there. A color picker is a good one where you can pick your color and you get your RGB value as well as a hexadecimal colors, which we will cover in a moment. But first, let us get back to the Pine editor. So that is how you build a color using the RGB function. We would change these values if we want to. Let us change them to just random numbers and save the script. Now we are getting a random color. So that is how you can play around with the RGB function to get custom colors. There are some other color functions we have to work with. If we do color control space, we can get the individual colors from a color. So we can get the blue value, the green value and the red value if we want to. I don't think you will ever need to do this unless you are working with a script that has a complex color theme to it. So we will skip that for now. So let us move on to another common application of the color namespace that you will be using, which is to generate transparency on the inbuilt colors. So let us say we just want to use the color dot. Let us go with blue this time. Let us save the script. Now we have a bright blue as our background color. But what if I wanted to apply, let us say, 20% transparency to this color? Well, the way we do that is doing the color new function. So this will generate a new color from an existing color, and basically it will just apply the transparency to the given color. So if I pass in here the color do blue comma, and then the next number we put in here will dictate the transparency of this new color. So if I put in 20% here, 20% transparency, save the script, or blue color will dim just slightly. If I set this to 90, then it will dim quite significantly. There we go. So that is how you get transparency from the inbuilt colors. So for example, if you were plotting the closing price here and you wanted to set the color to a transparent blue, or let us do a transparent green, this is how you do it. You set the color to the color new function, and then you pass in an inbuilt color or any color value for that matter. Does not have to be a inbuilt color, could be a custom RGB color. But again, if you are using the color RGB function, you can specify your transparency directly in there. So this is most used for applying transparency to the inbuilt colors that PineScript offers. So now if I save the script we are plotting, you probably can't see it very well because it is got 90% transparency. Let us change this to 50. We are plotting a green line onto our chart with 50% transparency using the inbuilt green color. The last color type that I will show you how to work with the hexadecimal colors. But this is how you will mostly be working with colors in your script. You apply the color parameter to whatever shape, plot, background color, whatever thing you are drawing onto your chart that can take a color input. This is how you assign it a color, and this is how you assign it a transparency amount. So let us get rid of this plot and get rid of this, and let us specify our color using hexadecimal code. So before I continue, what is a hexadecimal color, you might ask? Let us go to Google. So hex colors are a way of representing colors from various color models through hexadecimal values. Now hexadecimal is just a mathematical term. You don't need to know what it means. All you need to know is that the same way we use the RGB function to specify our red, green and blue values, hexadecimal does exactly the same thing, but it uses numbers and letters. So 0 is no color, F is full color, and everything in between these values is different shades. So we can count from 0 to 9 and from A to F. And then the way you specify your color is the first two values are your red values, or the first two letters or digits in your hex code are red. The second two digits are green and the last two are blue. And I believe in PineScript we also have access to another two digits which specifies your transparency. So you don't need to know how hexadecimal colors work in order to use them. So let us just jump back over to the PineScript editor, and I will wrap up this lesson by creating some hex colors. Before I do that, I should mention that there are several tools out there that you can use for picking up colors. Then just Google a color picker and there is heaps out there. Find one that you like, and then all you need to do is click on the color that you see on your screen and then copy this code here. So let us go with pink and copy this hex code and jump into the Pine editor. And now let us paste in this hex color and save the script. Voila! Easy. We have a nice pink background there using our hex colors. So again, let us just quickly go over these values. If I wanted a black background, all I need to do is 0000000. Save the script and we will get dark black. If I wanted white, it would be FFFF. Save the script. Now we have bright white, and I believe we can use transparency as well. So if I put in let us try a in here and save the script, see what happens. Yeah, that worked. So you can see that the white color dimmed a little bit. So you can specify your transparency with hex as well using the same range of values. So 0 to F or 0 to 9 and then A to F, with 0 being no transparency and F being full transparency. And so just to wrap up this lesson, let me just show you one last example. Let us change the background color to red. That would be FF 0000000. Save the script. There we have a bright red. Let us try a green. That would be 00FF. Save the script and we get bright green. So that is really it for colors in PineScript. They are quite simple to work with once you get the hang of the RGB function or the hex function, whichever you are more comfortable with. If you are used to using hex colors in graphic design or web design, just stick with hex colors. For the most part, you will probably be using a color dot and then the inbuilt colors here. I really use custom colors unless I am going to complex color scheme. Most of these inbuilt colors will do the job for most things that you do in PineScript. Just remember that if you need to apply transparency to it, you need to use the color new, then pass in the inbuilt color and then a transparency amount. Anyway, that is it for this lesson. I will speak with you in the next one.